Hi everybody, Ryan Shanley here from Systems Personnel to continue to improve your life through employment. Today, I want to talk to you about interview preparation. Some of the things that we cover today may be a refresher, but hopefully we will cover a couple of items that will allow you to create a really nice framework the next time you go on an interview and to help you with your preparation. First and foremost, you always want to start with a goal, no matter what you do. And I always coach my candidates that your goal should be to get invited to the next step in the process in the interview, whatever that might be. A second interview, an offer. You want to give yourself that option to say yes or no to that next step. And how you do that is by really good preparation and execution. Okay? Secondarily, just a couple of refreshers on interviews. They may seem obvious, but I get asked these questions often. And it's all about a first impression. And never take a first impression for granted because bad first impressions are really difficult to overcome. First and foremost, show up early. If it's an in-person interview, I would recommend showing up around 15 minutes early. That way you can park and get into the office, give yourself plenty of time. If it's a video interview, which is happening more often, or a phone call, you want to dial in at least 5 to 10 minutes early. You want to be waiting on them. You don't want them to be waiting on you. These are just small, early indications of punctuality. Lastly, make sure that you've done your research on the company and you have your notes in front of you. Not only on the research of the company, but you have the examples that you should have prepared the night before and any questions that you have, okay? I know those are refreshers, but really, really important things in order for you to make the proper first impression, okay? Now, a lot of interviews will start off and they'll say, hey, Ryan, or hey, Mr. or Mrs., here's a little bit about the company. Here's a little bit about our opportunity that we're looking to hire for. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? It's a very common first way to start an interview. And I get asked that question all the time. Ryan, how do I answer this question? Well, every answer is a little bit different, but I've come up with a quick and easy framework to help in most introduction parts of an interview. So first and foremost, the bottom line is you want to keep it short and sweet. The worst ones that I see are when potential candidates just go on and on and on about all of their jobs, every single projects, and then they're 10 to 15 minutes into their introduction and they've lost the attention of the hiring managers before the conversation even gets started. So there's 4 things that I always recommend you always want to include in your introduction to keep it nice, short, and sweet. Number 1, just a quick intro on who you are. Maybe, where you went to school or where you're from, right? So introduce yourself, a quick tidbit on yourself. Number 2, your years of experience. Very quick and general. I've been doing, accounting work for 20 years. I've been doing IT work for 10 years. Something along those lines. Number 3, your top skills, okay? These can be a combination of technical and soft skills. My top skills are 1, 2, and 3. And last but not least, a really good way to round out that introduction is telling them why you're here. Now, don't just use something as general as, oh, I'm here because I'm looking for a new job. Try to pull some specific information about the company or about the position that genuinely intrigues you and tell them why you're here today. And I'm here today because I noticed that you guys are working with a tool or technology that I'm really interested in learning, okay? So it's a nice way to round that out. So just to recap, the tell me about yourself speech with these 4 criteria, at the end of it, they will know who you are, how long you've been doing this for, what your top skills are, and why you're here. Nice way to, really set the tone for the rest of the conversation. Now, we're getting into the Q&A part of the interview, right? The bulk of the interview. A couple of things to keep in mind here. You always want to speak in examples. Anybody can say, oh, yes, I have that experience, or no, I don't have that experience. You really want to take some time the night before to go through your resume and to go through the job description and try to anticipate what are the types of areas or types of questions that they may ask me tomorrow. And I want to make sure that I come up with some examples and some responses proactively for tomorrow, and based off of my past experiences. Now, the trick is you have about an hour or maybe a half an hour to get years of experience into a finite conversation. So you want to speak in examples, but you also need to be concise. And one of the ways, there's a framework that we've worked with and coached our candidates on that's been very effective with that. So when you're preparing your examples, you want to keep the STAR framework in mind. And STAR is an acronym, and it stands for situation, task, action, result. So when they ask you a question about your specific experience with something, well, yes, I do have that experience actually. At my last employer, here was a situation when I had to use that. Here was the task at hand. Here were the actions I took to resolve that task. And here was the end result. So the bottom line, this framework may not apply to every single reply, but when you're preparing your examples, keep the STAR framework in mind so you can get your point across and be concise in the same breath. Now, another piece of information that's been helpful. Let's say they start asking you about certain skills, technical skills, certain experience with certain tools or technologies. Now, depending on the job, it could go a few different ways, but if they're going to ask you about Excel, if they're going to ask you about .NET, if they're going to ask you about SAP, right, specific tools, list each one you think that they're going to ask you about, and under each one of those, you want to list 3 things at a minimum to be prepared to talk about. How long have I been using this technology or tool, number 1. Number 2, what are some projects that I've used this tool on? And number 3, what's the most advanced thing I can do with this tool or technology? Those are probably the most common questions when I've been on interviews and they ask my candidates or our candidates about specific tools and technologies. They're generally grouped in one of these 3 categories, okay? And then last but not least on the Q&A part of the interview, make sure you think through the behavioral-based questions that they'll be asked you. Good interviews typically have a nice, good dose of technical questions and behavioral-based questions, such as, what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? Tell me about a major challenge that you experienced lately, and how did you handle that? How do you problem solve? Tell me about a time that you had a difficult employee or coworker, and how did you handle it? Okay? Those are some very common behavioral-based questions that you want to think through and make sure you have a solid answer or story for. Last but not least, questions. Questions are incredibly important in an interview, and I think a lot of people downplay the importance of questions in an interview for a couple of reasons. Number 1, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. Your goal in an interview should be to get as much information on an organization and a position so that you can make a proper decision if this position is for you or not. The second piece is how interested you are. It goes a long way. When I'm debriefing with hiring managers on interviews in the past, they always comment on, wow, that individual had really well prepared questions. And that says 2 things. Number 1, it shows you spent some time preparing for that and that you're taking this seriously. Number 2, that the type of individual you are, right? Have you ever come across an individual in your life and you're like, wow, that person always asks really good questions. It resonates with you. And so this is your first test at that. How well questions you can develop. How do you prepare for meetings? Hiring managers are on the lookout for this, and the question section of this certainly portrays that. Now, I always kind of categorize my questions into 2 different categories. First and foremost are the general questions that you should make sure you ask a potential employer so you have a good understanding of the potential role. These questions could include, number 1, can you describe the day-to-day responsibilities of this role? Number 2, can you describe the team structure and where I fall in on this team? Number 3, can you describe the tools and technologies that I'd be working with on a day-to-day basis? Number 4, can you describe what type of expectations I'll be held to in this position? If you notice, I'm prefacing these questions with a can you describe or can you tell me more about? Reason for that being, getting back to the efficiency, right? You have an hour or a half an hour to get everything in. By asking and phrasing your questions in a more open-ended fashion versus saying, do you use Excel or do I do this, right? Yes and no type of questions, you're going to get much more information out of a single question should you ask it in a more open-ended fashion. Now, secondarily, the category 2 questions are questions that really go above and beyond and show a potential hiring manager that you're really interested in adding value and understanding where the pain points are of the organization so you can contribute, right? And that has really gone a long way. We've gotten great feedback from potential hiring managers when candidates use and ask these types of questions, because there's not enough people with that type of mindset, frankly, out there. Examples of these questions include, hiring manager, can you describe a couple of things that I can do right away for this team to add the most value? Can you please describe where your greatest gaps and challenges are? And based on our conversation, how can I come in and help fill those gaps and eliminate those challenges? Number 3, can you describe what our mission and what our goal, long-term goal is for this team, and what can be my role in helping us get and achieve those long-term goals? Those are all questions that are strategic and will make them feel, I can tell this candidate is really interested about the bigger picture and they get it. They want to understand how their role contributes to the bigger picture, and they want to come in and hit the ground running. At the end of the interview, you always want to tell them you're interested and grab the contact information from the folks that you interviewed with so you can follow up with a thank you note. With the thank you note, you want to make sure that you include some detail in there. At a minimum, you want to tie in a couple of things specifically that caught your eye about the position or the conversation that solidified your interest. And then secondarily, reinforce how you believe your skills can align with this position. Good luck. I really hope this helps, and have a great rest of your day.